At 11:43 Greenwich Mean Time this morning, satellite imagery captured something that should not have been possible. The Russian Black Sea Fleet, an operational combat force that has dominated the waters around Crimea since 2014, has effectively disappeared from its primary naval base at Sevastopol. What happened next reveals a strategic collapse so complete that NATO intelligence services are scrambling to understand how an entire fleet simply vanished from what was supposed to be Russia's most secure warm water port. The implications of this development extend far beyond the Black Sea itself. The Russian Black Sea Fleet is not simply a collection of warships. The fleet represents Russia's only year-round access to warm water naval facilities, a strategic imperative that has shaped Russian foreign policy for more than 2 centuries. Sevastopol, the fleet's primary base on the Crimean Peninsula, has been the centerpiece of Russian naval strategy since Catherine the Great established the port in 1783. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, securing permanent control of Sevastopol was the primary strategic objective driving the entire operation. The base hosts shipyards, maintenance facilities, ammunition depots, and command infrastructure that cost Russia an estimated $8 billion to construct and upgrade over the past decade. The fleet itself consists of approximately 40 major surface combatants, 7 Kilo-class diesel-electric submarines, and dozens of support vessels. At its peak operational capacity in early 2022, the Black Sea Fleet displaced approximately 185,000 tons of warships and fielded more than 25,000 personnel. The flagship Moskva alone, before its sinking in April 2022, represented a $750 million investment in guided missile cruiser capability. The fleet's primary mission has been projecting Russian power into the Mediterranean Sea through the Turkish Straits, supporting operations in Syria and maintaining sea control throughout the Black Sea basin. Every commercial vessel transiting between the Mediterranean and Black Sea ports must pass through waters the Russian fleet has historically controlled. Now that fleet is gone. Not destroyed in combat, not sunk by Ukrainian missiles. Gone. The first indications emerged approximately 48 hours ago, when commercial satellite operators noticed unusual activity at Sevastopol's naval facilities. Ship berths that had held Russian warships for years were empty. Dry docks that typically service submarines and corvettes sat vacant. The pattern was too consistent to represent normal operational deployment. By yesterday morning, analysis of synthetic aperture radar imagery confirmed that major surface combatants had departed the base. By this afternoon, optical satellite passes revealed the stunning scope. Sevastopol's naval infrastructure stands essentially empty. The ships are simply not there. This is where the story becomes extraordinary. NATO surveillance assets have been tracking Black Sea naval movements continuously since February 2022. The alliance maintains persistent satellite coverage, deploys signals intelligence platforms throughout the region, and coordinates with Turkish monitoring of the Bosphorus Strait. Every Russian naval vessel that enters or exits the Black Sea must transit the Turkish Straits, a choke point where Turkish authorities maintain comprehensive surveillance under the terms of the Montreux Convention. The convention, signed in 1936, grants Turkey control over the straits while restricting the passage of warships from non-Black Sea nations. Russia's Black Sea Fleet can exit freely, but return passage during wartime is severely restricted. Here's what makes this situation unprecedented. Turkish authorities confirm that no significant Russian naval force has transited the Bosphorus in the past 72 hours. The vessels did not leave through the only exit from the Black Sea, yet they are not at Sevastopol. They are not at Novorossiysk, Russia's secondary Black Sea naval facility 250 miles to the east. They are not at any of the minor ports along Russia's Black Sea coast. Satellite imagery shows them simply absent from their normal operating areas. The United States European Command released a terse statement 3 hours ago, acknowledging awareness of the situation, but declining to provide details. Sources familiar with the intelligence assessment describe the mood at NATO headquarters in Brussels as somewhere between bewilderment and alarm. A naval force consisting of dozens of warships displacing nearly 200,000 tons does not simply vanish. The electromagnetic signature alone from that many vessels operating radars, communication systems, and electronic warfare equipment should be detectable by signals intelligence platforms throughout the region. Subscribe to Dr. Elena Harris right now and enable notifications, because what is actually happening to the Russian Black Sea Fleet represents a strategic development that news coverage is completely missing, and you need to understand exactly what this means for the balance of power across the entire European theater. The most immediate question centers on where the ships actually are. Several possibilities exist, each with drastically different implications. The first and most optimistic scenario from the Russian perspective involves a pre-planned dispersal to protected anchorages. The Black Sea contains numerous bays, inlets, and coastal areas where vessels could theoretically hide from satellite surveillance. The eastern coast of Crimea, the Kerch Strait region, and portions of the Caucasus coastline offer potential concealment. However, this theory faces significant problems. Modern satellite reconnaissance combines optical, infrared, and synthetic aperture radar sensors that can detect ships even under adverse conditions. Hiding 40 major warships from comprehensive overhead surveillance for more than 48 hours stretches credibility. The second possibility involves emergency relocation to inland waterways. Russia maintains extensive river and canal systems connecting the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea and internal waterways reaching as far north as the Baltic Sea. The Volga-Don Canal, completed in 1952, theoretically allows vessels to transit between the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. However, the canal's depth restrictions limit passage to vessels displacing less than 5,000 tons. Most Black Sea Fleet major combatants exceed this limit significantly. The guided missile frigates of the Admiral Grigorovich class displace 4,035 tons fully loaded and could theoretically make the transit, but the larger Slava-class cruisers and Krivat-class frigates cannot. This option could account for some vessels, but not the entire fleet. The third scenario represents the assessment that NATO intelligence sources are quietly beginning to consider. The ships did not hide and did not relocate inland. They are being systematically decommissioned and scrapped. This possibility seems absurd on its surface. Why would Russia voluntarily dismantle its only warm water fleet in the middle of an active conflict? The answer lies in the brutal economics and strategic realities the fleet now faces. The Russian Black Sea Fleet has taken catastrophic losses over the past 33 months of conflict with Ukraine. The sinking of the flagship Moskva in April 2022 eliminated the fleet's primary air defense and command vessel. Ukrainian strikes on Sevastopol's naval facilities in September 2023 destroyed the Kilo-class submarine Rostov-on-Don and the Rapucha-class landing ship Minsk while both were in dry dock. Subsequent attacks damaged the Admiral Makarov frigate, the Ivan Kurs intelligence ship, and numerous smaller vessels. Conservative estimates place Russian Black Sea Fleet losses at approximately 15 major warships sunk, damaged beyond economic repair, or removed from service due to maintenance requirements that cannot be met under current conditions. But the real crisis facing the fleet is not the ships already lost. The crisis is that the remaining ships have become essentially unusable in their intended role. Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles have a reported range of 300 kilometers. Ukrainian modified maritime drones have successfully struck Russian vessels at distances exceeding 200 kilometers from the Ukrainian coast. These drone boats cost approximately $250,000 each to produce, according to open-source defense analysis, while the Russian guided missile corvettes they target cost $300 million each. The asymmetric economics are devastating. Ukraine can produce dozens of drone boats for the cost of a single Russian corvette. The Russian vessels cannot operate safely within 300 kilometers of the Ukrainian coast, which effectively excludes them from the northwestern quadrant of the Black Sea entirely. This operational constraint has transformed the Black Sea Fleet from a power projection tool into an expensive liability. The ships consume enormous resources in maintenance, fuel, and crew costs, while contributing virtually nothing to Russian military objectives. A single Admiral Grigorovich-class frigate requires approximately 200 crew members, burns 25 tons of fuel per day at cruising speed, and demands continuous maintenance to remain seaworthy. Multiply those requirements across 40 warships, and the resource drain becomes staggering. Russia is spending billions of rubles annually to maintain a fleet that cannot safely approach Ukrainian waters, cannot transit the Turkish Straits to reach the Mediterranean during the current conflict, and serves no meaningful strategic purpose in its current posture. The economic dimension becomes even more stark when examining Russia's overall naval maintenance capacity. The Russian shipbuilding industry has been devastated by Western sanctions targeting advanced electronics, precision machinery, and technical components essential for modern warship maintenance. Key suppliers in the European Union and United States that previously provided critical systems have ceased all cooperation. China has proven willing to supply some components, but lacks the specific expertise for maintaining Soviet-era warship systems that still comprise much of the fleet. The result is a maintenance backlog that has reached crisis levels across the entire Russian Navy. Reports from naval analysts monitoring Russian shipyards describe a situation approaching systemic failure. The Sevastopol shipyard that historically serviced Black Sea Fleet vessels has seen its workforce decline by an estimated 40% since 2022 as skilled workers flee Crimea or are conscripted into ground forces. The facility lacks spare parts for critical systems including radar arrays, fire control computers, and electronic warfare equipment. Ships entering maintenance often remain there for months or years as technicians attempt to source components or fabricate replacements for systems that are no longer manufactured. The maintenance queue has grown so long that vessels requiring routine service must wait 18 to 24 months for dry dock availability. Under these conditions, the strategic calculus for maintaining the Black Sea Fleet fundamentally changes. Each ship represents not an asset, but a liability consuming resources desperately needed elsewhere. The crew members would be more valuable reassigned to submarines, surface combatants in the Northern Fleet, or even transferred to ground forces where Russia faces persistent manpower shortages. The fuel consumption could be redirected to operational vessels that can actually accomplish military objectives. The maintenance resources could be concentrated on platforms that serve strategic purposes. This brings us to what the satellite imagery actually shows at Sevastopol. The ships are not at sea. They are not hidden. They are being systematically cut apart for scrap. Enhanced resolution imagery from commercial satellite operators shows telltale signs of demolition operations at several berths. Cutting torches, crane activity consistent with removing superstructure sections, material staging areas where metal components are being sorted. The operations bear all the hallmarks of shipbreaking. Russia is not announcing this development. The political and propaganda costs would be enormous. Admitting that the Black Sea Fleet is being scrapped would be acknowledging that Ukrainian resistance has made the fleet operationally worthless. It would be confirming that Russia can no longer maintain its naval forces under the sanctions regime. It would be revealing strategic weakness at a moment when projecting strength remains central to the Kremlin's domestic political strategy. Instead, the vessels are simply disappearing quietly, while official statements remain silent about their status. The implications extend far beyond the Black Sea itself. The Russian Black Sea Fleet has historically served as Russia's platform for Mediterranean operations. Russian naval facilities in Syria depend on support and reinforcement from the Black Sea Fleet transiting the Turkish Straits. With the fleet effectively gone, Russia's entire Mediterranean presence becomes vulnerable. The logistics chain supporting operations in Syria, the naval facilities at Tartus, and Russia's broader Middle East military presence all depended on the ability to rotate personnel, supply spare parts, and deploy additional forces through the Black Sea Fleet. That capability is evaporating. Turkey finds itself in a peculiar strategic position. The Montreux Convention grants Turkey control over the Turkish Straits, but also obligates Turkey to allow free passage to Black Sea naval powers during peacetime. With the Russian Black Sea Fleet effectively ceasing to exist as an operational force, Turkey's strategic calculations for managing the Straits fundamentally change. The Russian naval threat that has constrained Turkish freedom of action in the Black Sea for decades is simply gone. This development opens options for Turkey to expand its own naval presence, potentially increase NATO operations in the Black Sea, or leverage its control of the Straits as a diplomatic tool in ways that were previously too risky given Russian naval power. NATO member states with Black Sea coastlines, Romania and Bulgaria, are processing the implications of Russian naval power effectively vanishing from their immediate strategic environment. For 3 decades, these nations have developed their defense posture around the reality of Russian naval superiority in the Black Sea. Romania has invested billions in anti-ship missile systems, coastal defense capabilities, and surveillance infrastructure designed to counter the Russian fleet. Bulgaria has maintained a defensive naval strategy built around the assumption that it could not match Russian Black Sea naval power. Those foundational assumptions are suddenly obsolete. The second-order effects reach across the entire European theater. Russian naval power has been a key element in Moscow's strategic toolkit for 2 centuries. The Black Sea Fleet represented one of 4 Russian fleet commands, alongside the Northern Fleet, Pacific Fleet, and Baltic Fleet. With the Black Sea Fleet effectively eliminated as a combat force, Russia's overall naval power has been reduced by approximately 25%. This reduction cascades through Russian strategic planning for any potential NATO conflict. The ability to threaten NATO's southern flank through the Mediterranean is drastically reduced. The capacity to support expeditionary operations in Africa and the Middle East is severely constrained. The psychological impact of demonstrating that sustained Ukrainian resistance has forced Russia to scrap an entire fleet command is difficult to overstate. China is watching this development with intense interest. Beijing has invested enormous resources in building a blue water navy capable of challenging American naval supremacy in the Pacific. Chinese naval strategists have studied Russian naval doctrine and operations for decades. The spectacle of Russia's Black Sea Fleet being rendered worthless and scrapped because of long-range precision strikes and asymmetric drone warfare provides a stark lesson about the vulnerability of expensive surface combatants to determined adversaries wielding relatively cheap precision weapons. Chinese analysts examining this case study must be questioning whether their own $8 billion Type 055 guided missile destroyers and $2 billion Type Eros 52D destroyers face similar vulnerabilities to American and allied anti-ship missiles and autonomous systems. Iran provides perhaps the closest parallel to Russia's current dilemma. The Iranian Navy has historically struggled to maintain Soviet-era vessels in operational condition under international sanctions. Iranian shipyards lack the technical capacity to fabricate replacement components for complex systems, forcing Iran to either accept degraded capabilities or cannibalize ships for spare parts. The result is a navy that exists primarily on paper, with actual operational capabilities far below the nominal fleet size. Russia appears to be traveling the same path, but at an accelerated pace and from a much higher starting point. The United States Navy is conducting its own analysis of how Ukrainian tactics eliminated an entire Russian fleet without sinking every ship. The lessons learned have immediate applicability to American operations in potential conflict scenarios with China or Iran. Ukrainian success came not from matching the Russian fleet ship for ship, but from creating conditions where the fleet could not operate safely and became an unsustainable resource burden. The combination of land-based anti-ship missiles, maritime drones, satellite surveillance, and targeting networks created a contested maritime environment where expensive warships faced unacceptable risk from much cheaper weapons. American naval doctrine is already incorporating these lessons into planning for Pacific operations where similar dynamics could apply. The economic dimension deserves deeper examination. Scrapping major warships produces raw materials with significant value. A guided missile frigate contains hundreds of tons of steel, copper wiring, brass fittings, aluminum superstructure components, and various strategic metals, including titanium, nickel, and specialty alloys. At current commodity prices, the scrap value from a single Admiral Grigorovich-class frigate could reach $15 million to $20 million. For a Russian defense budget under severe strain from sustained military operations and international sanctions, recovering even a fraction of the fleet's original construction cost through scrap sales provides desperately needed hard currency. Russia has historical precedent for this approach. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia scrapped hundreds of naval vessels that could no longer be maintained or crewed. The process took more than a decade and involved cutting up submarines, destroyers, cruisers, and even aircraft carriers for scrap metal. Environmental concerns, safety issues, and international assistance programs complicated the process, but the underlying logic was inescapable. Better to recover some value from vessels that would otherwise rot at their moorings than to continue pouring resources into maintaining ships that served no strategic purpose. The current situation differs in one critical respect. The Soviet naval drawdown occurred during peacetime and was announced publicly as a necessary consequence of economic collapse. The current Black Sea Fleet situation is occurring during active conflict and is being obscured from public view. Russia cannot acknowledge that Ukrainian resistance has forced the effective elimination of an entire fleet command without suffering enormous propaganda damage. The solution is simply to make the ships disappear quietly and hope that international attention remains focused elsewhere. That strategy may have worked in earlier decades before commercial satellite surveillance became ubiquitous. Modern Earth observation satellites operated by commercial entities like Planet Labs, Maxar, and European Space Imaging make it impossible to hide major industrial activities. Cutting apart warships at Sevastopol produces visual signatures that satellite analysts can detect and track. The information will eventually reach public awareness regardless of Russian preferences. NATO's response to this development has been remarkably muted in public statements, while likely intense in confidential strategic reassessments. The public silence makes tactical sense. Announcing that the Russian Black Sea Fleet has effectively ceased to exist would force Moscow to respond, potentially hardening Russian resolve to somehow reconstitute the fleet or escalate in other domains to compensate for the loss. Better to allow Russia to quietly scrap the fleet while avoiding provocative public statements that would back the Kremlin into a corner. However, the strategic implications require immediate NATO attention. The entire alliance defense posture for southeastern Europe and the Mediterranean has been built around assumptions about Russian Black Sea naval power. Those assumptions are now wrong. Defense planning must be updated. Force posture requires adjustment. Intelligence assessments need revision. The process will take months to work through alliance bureaucracy and national military planning cycles, but the work begins immediately. Romania faces perhaps the most immediate strategic recalculation. Romanian defense investments over the past 2 decades prioritize capabilities to counter the Russian Black Sea Fleet. The acquisition of 4 second-hand Norwegian Oslo-class frigates, development of coastal defense missile batteries, and creation of a maritime surveillance network all reflected the Russian naval threat. With that threat effectively gone, Romania's strategic priorities must shift. The resources and capabilities built to counter Russian warships can be reallocated to other threats or missions. Bulgaria's position is more complex. Bulgarian political leadership has historically attempted to balance between NATO membership and maintaining functional economic ties with Russia. The effective disappearance of the Russian Black Sea Fleet removes one pressure point in this balancing act, while creating new strategic realities. Bulgaria's small navy was never going to match Russian capabilities, which allowed Sofia to justify minimal naval investment. With Russian naval dominance gone, Bulgaria may face pressure from NATO allies to increase its maritime contributions to collective defense, a politically difficult proposition for a government already managing competing domestic pressures. Ukraine itself has achieved something remarkable, even if Ukrainian leadership never specifically set out to eliminate the entire Russian Black Sea Fleet. Through sustained attacks on high-value vessels, strikes on naval infrastructure, and creation of a maritime exclusion zone around Ukrainian waters, Ukraine effectively rendered the fleet operationally worthless to Russia. The achievement is particularly notable because Ukraine accomplished it without possessing a significant navy of its own. The Ukrainian Navy consisted of approximately 15,000 personnel and fewer than 30 operational vessels before the 2022 invasion. Most Ukrainian naval assets were captured or destroyed in the initial weeks of the conflict. Yet, through asymmetric warfare, Ukrainian forces created conditions where a vastly superior Russian fleet could not operate safely and ultimately became more trouble than it was worth. This success provides a blueprint for other nations facing regional naval powers. Taiwan studies Ukrainian tactics with intense interest, given its own potential conflict with China's numerically superior navy. Small European nations on NATO's eastern flank examine how Ukraine neutralized Russian naval advantages using relatively cheap weapon systems. Developing nations facing naval threats from larger neighbors see evidence that expensive warships can be defeated without matching them ship for ship. The implications for naval procurement worldwide deserve examination. Defense ministries globally spend enormous sums on major surface combatants. Guided missile destroyers cost $2 billion to $3 billion each. Aircraft carriers exceed $10 billion. The logic traditionally held that these expensive platforms provided capabilities worth the investment. The Black Sea experience suggests that perspective requires reconsideration. If anti-ship missiles costing $2 million each and maritime drones costing $250,000 each can force a multi-billion-dollar fleet into uselessness, the economic calculus for naval procurement fundamentally changes. The counter-argument holds that Russia's Black Sea Fleet suffered from poor tactics, inadequate defensive measures, and strategic mistakes that allowed Ukrainian weapons to achieve disproportionate effects. A well-operated fleet with proper air defense, effective electronic warfare, and competent command could have countered the Ukrainian threat. This perspective has merit. Russian failures in basic naval operations contributed significantly to Ukrainian success. The Moskva sinking occurred partly because the ship's air defense systems were reportedly disabled or ineffective at the crucial moment. Russian naval deployments often showed poor situational awareness and inadequate force protection. Examining the Moskva incident reveals the cascading failures that characterized Russian Black Sea Fleet operations throughout the conflict. The Slava-class guided missile cruiser displaced 11,490 tons fully loaded and carried a crew of 510. The vessel mounted an impressive array of weaponry, including 16 P-1000 Vulcan anti-ship missiles with a range of 700 kilometers, 64 S-300F, fort surface-to-air missiles capable of engaging targets at ranges up to 90 kilometers, close-in weapon systems, torpedoes, and anti-submarine warfare capabilities. On paper, the Moskva represented a formidable air defense platform that should have been able to defend itself against incoming missiles. Yet on April 14, 2022, Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles struck the vessel with devastating effect. The Neptune missile, a Ukrainian development based on Soviet-era Kh-35 technology, has a reported range of 280 to 300 kilometers and carries a 150-kilogram warhead. The missile flies at subsonic speeds using sea-skimming flight profiles to avoid radar detection until the terminal attack phase. Standard naval air defense doctrine calls for detecting incoming missiles at maximum radar range, engaging with long-range surface-to-air missiles, following up with medium-range weapons if the initial engagement fails, and employing close-in weapon systems as a last resort. The Moskva possessed all these capabilities yet failed to defeat the attack.